It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of #Event Icons, presented by Endless Events, the show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. So, you might be wondering, how do you get to ask questions? All you have to do is use the question panel on the right of GoToWebinar to submit your questions. Or you can hop on Twitter to submit your questions with the #EventIcons. We'll be answering your questions live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better conversation we can have. So please help share #EventIcons on Twitter and Facebook. Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com. Now, without any further delay, this is #EventIcons with your hosts, Will Curran of Endless Events, Laura Lopez of Social Tables, and Brant Kruger of Event Technology Consulting.
All right, everybody. Hello and welcome to Event Icons, the place where you get to spend an hour with the icons of the event industry. Now, today is going to be kind of a wonky, well, I should say I'm Brant Kruger. Will and Laura are on assignment, though Will is kind of lurking in the chat room, so he might be around to ask us some questions as well. However, today it is my pleasure to be talking to a couple of guys, and it's going to be kind of more of a wonky propeller hat, nuts and bolts episode compared to some of our other ones, because today we're going to be talking about show calling and production, and I'm being joined by two of the best that we could bring in and talk about this very good topic. First of all, we've got Stephen Bowles, who is the founder of ShoFlo. For those of you that don't know out there, ShoFlo is an event production software that really it allows the production team to build, and this is the key part, in real time. They're building cue sheets, show flows, rundowns, production schedule, all of that paperwork that gets generated on a meeting or event, all in real time. Hey, Stephen, welcome.
What's up? Hey, Brant.
Thanks for joining us today. We're also being joined by Keith Oberfeld, who is the founder of KBOGroup Incorporated. And if you haven't heard of them, KBOGroup is a full-service event production company. They're serving all kinds of clients all over the world. And thanks for joining us, Keith.
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks.
I was trying to see if I could summarize that more, but I thought that pretty much summarized it up. I mean, you guys do stuff for associations and corporate. I mean, you're all over the place.
We are. We do work for your standard corporate clients, basic ballroom shows, but we also do a lot of nonprofit work. We do work with a company in Grand Rapids, Michigan called DisArt, where we've been working with disability artists and in fashion show situations. So we're all across the board, and that's the way we like it.
Great, and I'm going to also kind of throw myself in here as part host, part guest, because for those of you who haven't heard some of the episodes that I've been on where I went into my background, I worked for a meeting and event production company for about 18 years before I went out and founded Event Technology Consulting. So I still do a fair amount of freelance show calling, and so that's why I really wanted to be a part of this episode. But before we get into the good meaty stuff, we always have our standard questions that we ask all of the event icons that come on our show. So Stephen, we're going to start with you. What got you into the events industry?
I mean, I feel like I fell into it just like everybody else did. I wanted to do film in high school. Like, I wanted to be Steven Spielberg so very, very bad. I wanted to make his movies. And so I was, shooting stuff on my little Canon, mini DV cameras and all that stuff, and just, applying all over the place for film schools. And bet really hard on one, UCF, got accepted in the film school, but like the regular school finally at the end of the school year said, oh wait, your GPA is too low, so my world just kind of like crumbled down. And so I found a guy who works at LMG now, who had worked for Nickelodeon and MTV and a handful of other like live sort of television and live broadcast groups, and so he's like, hey, just come hang with me and I'll save you a whole degree, and we'll and that was kind of the change of it. So from there on, I just kind of played hard into the live event industry, learning AV, learning video, and then really kind of building most of my career around directing, cameras for live events, mostly corporate stuff. Okay,
and if you hadn't gone down that road, what would you be doing instead?
If I hadn't gone down, I straight up, I didn't know, I wasn't on track to be a finance guy, I'll tell you that right now. So it was, I was going all in on film, and if I had been able to get accepted in that, I truly would believe that I'd be in Hollywood or New York City, just really picking up more of the creative film side of things. And if live directing, or sorry, if film directing didn't take off, then post video would have been. I mean, I've always lived in production, whether it's film or live video and sort of AV show teching or post production. I've basically never done anything but that until ShoFlo, where it's software, which is a little different, but that's later.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get into ShoFlo and what it can do for folks and how it works and all that kind of good stuff. Keith, same standard questions. All right, what got you into the events industry?
Well, as Stephen said, it is normal. I completely fell into it. I started out as a theater lighting designer, and I still do a lot of theater lighting design when I have a minute or two free, which usually means 1 or 2 shows a year. But I designed for theater for 5 years before I even thought about corporate work. And coming out of my theater background, at some point I had the extremely good idea that I was going to be a rock and roll lighting designer. So I moved to Los Angeles for a couple of years and went to work for a company called Sundance Lighting, which was run by a guy named Jim Moody, who literally wrote the book on rock and roll concert design. And I was LD for Blondie for a year, for Tom Waits for a year, and then I got sense into my head and came back and started working in theater again because the rock and roll road lifestyle wasn't going to last. So I really fell into it. One of the guys, it came about a very strange way from Amway Corporation, which is located in the city where I live. They were starting to do corporate events, and they knew the theater folks, so they decided to take a couple of us on the road for $150 a week. And that's how I got started. And then I also was technical director for opera companies for many years, and opera companies combine everything. They combine every imaginable kind of special effect lighting, projection, and that naturally led into corporate show calling and corporate producing. As far as what I would do if I wasn't in this, there was no plan B. We always say if we don't have it tomorrow in the industry, our next questions are going to be, would you like fries with that, ma'am?
Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, or punching in your address into the phones for your Uber driver.
Uber.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Let's get into the topic du jour of production and show calling. So, Keith, I'm going to throw this one kind of your way. Let's start out with some of the basics and just kind of get some of the ground rules out there, or some of the definitions that are out there. What in your mind would you say is the difference between like a production company and an AV company? What are the difference between those two types of things?
Well, those lines can be very blurred depending on what the event is. A production company, the sort of company that I run, provides front-end planning for the entire event. And then interfaces with the client on one side and the AV company on the other side. So we have a role that's called producer or production manager. We usually provide a technical director as well. We often provide creative people to create content for the client, and also show callers and stage managers, basically the management side of the event. AV company is the gear and for the most part the people, although that's where the line really blurs. Sometimes the AV company is going to provide key positions. Sometimes the production company is going to provide key positions. A lot of producers want to have their video director and their A1 front of house audio guy and possibly a lighting designer as part of the production side and not as part of the AV side. It also depends on the scale of the event. If it's a smaller event, those folks are going to more likely come from the AV company. But as producers, we prefer to provide all the planning for the event and the interface with AV, and we are, unlike some production companies, we really believe in getting the AV company involved at the get-go, at the very beginning of the event, so that at least a number of people and the key roles in the AV company are involved from the start. So we'll do show caller, we'll do all the stage management usually. Creative can come from a number of different places, depending on who it is, and we usually like to staff a front of house audio guy and a video director as well. And one of our favorite video directors doesn't work in the industry anymore. He went and founded a software company, so I'm kind of pissed about that.
It's been a while, Keith, since you and I have worked together. It's been, I don't know, probably since the year I started ShoFlo.
Yeah, Mr. Bowles and I arrived together on a tech show called Demo that was produced in San Francisco and Silicon Valley for several years. And it was actually a perfect crucible for ShoFlo development because we had 60 presenters in the course of 2 4-hour sessions. And every presenter had a different either laptop or iPad or iPhone, number of presenters, number of people mic'd on stage. They had 6 minutes and they got shuffled on and off very quickly. It was sort of for angels and mostly for investors. But anyway, good crucible for that. And that's where Stephen and I met.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that it was basically like a TechCrunch disrupt or whatever. Everyone got up there and did their little 2 or 3 minute demos. And I remember taking out, to you, Keith, a like MVP beta version or like a prototype of ShoFlo, and you clicking around with it and being like, this has all the right concepts, but it doesn't do these 10 things. Come back to me when it does these 10 things. It's like, you're right. Okay, I'll do it.
So, Keith, when you guys are providing, it seems like the line kind of tends to be between production and AV, the amount of upfront work. Like you say, you're generating the paperwork, you've got people that are actively working on the show, you're acting more as a management company. Do you usually provide the show caller, or do you have that being provided by the AV company?
Oh, we almost always provide the show caller. I do some of the work for us. We have a younger woman in our office who's also an expert ShoFlo person who does a lot of it for us, and then we know a bunch of folks in the industry, of course. I've found that 90% of the show callers in the industry are permalancers. Just about everybody is. I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody who works for an AV company who's a show caller, but I'm sure that's just from lack of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and like you say, those lines are blurring quite a bit. So, I mean, as the AV companies flirt with being more of a production company, they might have someone who's kind of more responsible for calling shows, or who's more responsible for creating the show flow and things like that. And it's for better or worse. I agree. It certainly seems like you're seeing more of those lines blurred. More and more AV companies even rebranding themselves as production companies. Again, for better or for worse. Some tack on the word production on the back of their name but are still pretty much the same old company. So that's obviously something to watch out for.
Yeah, and some of them are better at it than others.
Exactly. I was trying to dance around that a little bit, but absolutely. Stephen, could you tell us a little bit about what you see as the role of the show caller? You deal with them obviously all day long as part of your product. So how do you see the role of the show caller compared to the other roles that a production company might have?
I think Keith nailed it on the head, and actually we can generally tell when we're engaging with a production company or someone who's interested in ShoFlo, the production, I guess the tier of production that they service at, based on the fact that is show callers and the role of a show caller important to them? Because if it's not, then they're likely not producing shows that are interesting enough, to warrant large, stage production and lights and cameras and all that stuff. You can do a breakout room with pretty much just maybe a production coordinator or a project manager who's got his A1 or his multi-knifed AV, right? His little Swiss Army knife AV guy who can hit the PowerPoint and also flip the lights on and off and also hit the playback button on the audio. But once you bump up in scale there, and in terms of tier, at some point there's a real responsibility, I think, for the producer of a show to not be the person who calls the show. It doesn't mean they can't be the same. Like they often can be, but the larger the show goes, the more that producer needs to be client-facing, on the front row with the client, doing whatever they're doing. Or just on headset, in speaker rooms, all that kind of stuff. Because the larger the show caller is actually responsible for running those rehearsals. When the producer might be in another room preparing, a session for later today. the show caller is actually rehearsing the thing that's happening in an hour or tomorrow morning, and so I find that that's an important piece when we're interacting with anybody. If they're kind of scratching their head on the value of a show caller, or if that's a good role, I can usually get a gut check real quick of going, ShoFlo could help you, or I'm sure you produce great events, but they're not the events I used to do. They're not the events that we kind of really built ShoFlo for. Like our down the fairway production or event is going to have, a producer, a production coordinator, a show caller, an A1, an LD, a video engineer, an audio, a graphics operator. That's 6 or 7, and that's before you add in their second positions for all those things.
And a spider operator, and usually some sort of media pusher, whether it's Watch Out or Pandora or whatever.
Exactly.
I sort of see the show callers, one of their most important functions, and the reason for being is that you've got somebody who's client facing on one side and AV facing on the other side, and able to speak both of those languages. And those are 2 difficult languages to speak, because you have to make sure that you're trying to make rehearsals and shows march in the way that your client wants to, but also not take advantage of, but know what the capabilities of your AV team is, so that you're not taxing them too much or throwing them under the bus. So you want to protect the AV people and make the show work at the same time. So those are 2 different faces to wear, and there's not a lot of people who do that very well.
Yeah.
But
I remember, Keith, like the demo show or whatever it is, but I actually once did a show in Orlando for Walmart, and it was in the convention center, just massive, right? Just massive. And if you were to walk into the room during rehearsals, you'd see all sorts of things happening, but no sound. Is it like no one's actually talking on the stage on a megaphone or anything like that? There's not like this crazy loudspeaker thing going on. It's all happening right here in a headset. But then as soon as you put on that headset, boom, it's like you get access to this whole other world, and the show caller is managing, you got can be up to 25 to 50 people who are trying to use the same production channel to communicate things. And you've got people who are prepping a stage move over here, but a guy's rehearsing graphics on the screen, but then another guy's, and so the show caller is responsible for all of that. I mean, the producer can override the show caller, and from my experience at any given time, but he shouldn't, unless it's an emergency situation, because you're basically asking the show caller to juggle a whole bunch of things at the same time, and they need the ability to do that. And I think the great show callers, you can tell, they just take that all in stride. It's like another thing got added on. Someone comes on comm and says, hey, Jeff Johnson just walked in, or Steve Jobs just walked into the corner of the room. What do you want me to do with him? And it's like, that could freak a bunch of people out, but instead they just take it in stride, say, go do that. They just know and have seen enough shows to know how to handle those things.
And staying calm, staying cool under pressure, huge part of it. You guys teed off on about 8 different things, and I'm going to try and pick and choose some of the ones. I mean, one of the things I liked when you talked about kind of the funnel, and I know everybody kind of runs shows a little bit differently, but that's definitely been my feeling, that when things kind of go through not only just a funnel, but almost like an hourglass, where you've got everything funneling into the producer or some kind of central point of contact that then can funnel to the show caller, that then spits it out to all of the various parts of the show. So that would be one example of when you might want to bring in a full-time, a full show caller. And then the other thing that you kind of sparked on was when you start talking about having multiple cues simultaneously. It's one thing when we're going to do a video and we're going to switch to a PowerPoint here, like you said, kind of the octopus tech, going and doing it all by themselves. But it's another when you've got multiple people having multiple things happening all at once. That's when you really kind of need that one person that's going to say the GO. It's even hard for me to say it in a non-context.
I can't say it. It's not a
word. So for those of you that don't know what we're talking about, you never say the word go unless you're actually running a queue, because you don't want somebody accidentally jumping on it. So what I'd like to kind of get into now is some of the basics of, all right, we've figured out we've got this certain level of show, like you talked about, where we realize we're at that next tier. We've got multiple things going on at once. We've got multiple people involved. We've got our hourglass or funnel or whatever it is that you need. Who's gonna start building that show flow? And for those that might not know what we're talking about, that's the document that show caller uses to go through all of those cues. Who starts to generate that?
Well, in the old days when it was a run a show, I mean that's
yeah, run a show, ShoFlo, yeah, same, yeah.
It was usually generated on Excel. It was usually generated initially in a very skeletal version by a producer, who then passed it down to the show caller or the AV team, depending on how that was going to go, and it got filled out from there. And after spending 20 hours trying to construct a gigantic Excel document and having Excel crash 3 times. And printing 32 versions of it, it finally got to a point where you could run a show from it. That's kind of the old style. And it was a broken system, and we all knew it was broken, but we didn't know what to do about it.
And I want to pause you because I know where we're going with this, but I just want to really sit for a minute on the old system, because like you said, it was in Excel, and I mean, and you get shows that have hundreds of cues which can be within the space of 10 minutes. I know I had a show that had 200 and some watch out cues in one 10-minute speech. I mean, and it was just dut and dut and dut and dut, and so you can have hundreds and hundreds of cues. So now imagine you're in an Excel spreadsheet, which you're printing out most of the time, hard copies, and then, yeah, somebody walks in and has a change. So how do you deal with that? Now you've got to bring printers on site, or you've got to run down to the office, the hotel, business office, and pay $1,000 a copy for that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to just sit on that for a little bit, so that people kind of understand the evolution of where we're going to when we start to talk about your product, Stephen, of ShoFlo. So tell us a little bit. You kind of hinted at it. What were the origins of ShoFlo, and what made you start to see, okay, this is something that needs to be made?
Yeah, I mean, I love the production industry, I always have, so I never want to leave it. And so I was deep up to my eyeballs in it, working shows, 2 or 3 a month, and just loved that lifestyle. Of course, for those 10 years, I never dated anybody or did anything else. I mean, I was just all in shows and all in production all the time. But yeah, so I was on the backstage on a show down in Naples, and I had been looking for ways to not have to be on show site all the time. I didn't believe in my long-term future in the production industry being me traveling around and billing day rates. Even though there's a lot of great value in that and success, and people offer just these the people who do stuff like that, who do watch out, that do Pandoras, travel around 48 weeks a year. It's incredible what they do, and we couldn't do it without them. I knew long-term I didn't really want to go that route, and so I kept always trying to think, what could I be doing? What could I offer to the industry that would allow it to go out to 100 places or to 1,000 places, in a month, and I wouldn't have to. And I thought the traditional production industry, vendors, I could start my own company or start my own production company or whatever. And I had toyed with software on the side, and so I just I was backstage at a Joe Merch show. Merch Productions down here in Orlando, and I literally just put all my notes into the rundown of the run of show, and as a video director, and he came over and had dropped a new one and said, "Hey, client just struck the video. Here's a new version of the." It's hot off the presses, and I just basically, I remember it. I just started laughing, and I was like, "This is retarded, why am you? I just finished. What do you want me to move all that stuff over, or should I keep my current version? Which one do you suggest?" He's like, "Whatever you want, but this is the new information." And I remember just thinking, this is ridiculous. And so I pitched it right there on comm, backstage to my video guys. I remember it. I remember pitching them to a couple of my video dudes and being like, what if there was an app, that did this? And that,
in the world.
Yeah, and Google, Google was doing their thing at the time too. Google Sheets and ShoFlo, we don't try to live in a silo. We're aware that that's a workflow now that's more popular. But I remember being like, but you know what? You can build personal budgets and you know, whatever you want in Excel and in Google Sheets, but, you know, what if this one only did rundowns, like only focused on runner shows or cue sheets and all that kind of stuff. And so then I, with my kind of creative background, ended up creating a presentation, just straight up just design only, and went and pitched it to the show caller at the front of house. He's a freelance show caller named Sandy, and he was like getting jibed up about it. And then I went and pitched it, you know, when I got back home to about 3 or 4 other production companies that I was freelancing for. They got jibed about it. I pitched it to Keith and such, and so then I finally just went and found a developer who actually worked in the industry as well too, and we built it. We built the MVP version together. So, anyways, all that long backstory just to share, like, the why. I mean, that's it. The why was because you know, it needed to get updated. It needed to get reformed. You know, the workflow's a little busted, and it had so much room for opportunity and so much room for change. Since then, the why has really expanded for me. You know, now that ShoFlo's, you know, is being used in as many shows as it is at any given time, the why is a lot clearer to me. And I was actually just working on a new pitch presentation for us today. But basically, it's pretty simple. You think about it, like Keith is running around backstage with his client. Hannah, his show caller, is calling and rehearsing something on the stage. The guy on the stage almost 9 out of 10 times is going to ask for something to change if it's just a slide reorder. But what if he walks out and changes a video? You've already got all of these billable crew members billing you per hour right there, and they're just wanting to know what to do. And you're telling them on comm it's different, but what they have printed in front of them is what they were last told to do. And so you're setting yourself up for failure, I believe, and you're increasing the likelihood that you're going to have somebody play the wrong audio cue or the wrong video file or whatever it is, let alone yourself as a show caller, because you're managing multiple saved versions of an Excel rundown on your computer. So all those reasons right there are just kind of like tip of the iceberg as to why you would even consider switching to a collaborative workflow. The other half that I love to watch teams like embrace is, you know, the Excel workflow is a single editor workflow. So it's like only what Keith cares about makes it into the printout, or only what the show caller deemed worthy, you know, made it into the printout. But when you move it into a collaborative environment where Keith can invite his LD in, and Keith can go, hey, Steve Jobs' presentation, under the lighting column, it should be stage wash. The lighting guy can actually then go in and write in, oh, well, that's going to be LX 45.6 or whatever that cue actually is. And so to be able to like bring that thing to life, you bring more voices into it to where it's more accurate. Now Keith, when he's calling that cue, it can actually be helpful and not just say, hey, Steve Jobs to the stage and stage wash up, go. He can say, and LX 45.6, go. And so he can actually be helpful. And that's the thing that always brings me joy when I hear the teams on the other end of an event when they first start using ShoFlo. Like, you know, it's cool because the producer and the show caller got to work together, but what I really liked is when I saw my LD and my A1 get in there and they started adding cues. I didn't even know they were writing this stuff down, but before they were writing it down on a pen and paper. Now they're actually putting it, you know, into the ShoFlo. So
there's a reason. Sorry about the technology issue, by the way. There's a reason that this need developed. I've been in the industry for a long time. When we were rolling videotapes and we were doing PowerPoint presentations, it had to be, you know, prepared and done a week before the show. Excel was a reasonable format because it didn't change that much. Maybe you did 2 versions. Now, because we've given our clients the opportunity to change until the last possible second, and we've given them that opportunity, and they've taken it very happily. You're going to have 50 different versions of a Excel spreadsheet or a ShoFlo now, if you want it to reflect exactly what's going on. And the nicest thing about ShoFlo for me, other than I'll speak to the collaborative thing in a minute too, is just the instant updating of everything, because I update as I call, as I do rehearsals. I update all the time. So by the time the rehearsal's over, the ShoFlo is updated. It's done. I'm not going back to my hotel room and knocking out an Excel spreadsheet for 2 or 3 hours after it's over. Also, by updating everybody quickly, you're saving rehearsal time and you're saving crew time. And I think Stephen just spoke to that a minute ago. You know, we're on 10-hour days. We need to work 10-hour days. Client doesn't like to see overtime. And also if you can keep it to 10-hour days, then you can go out and you can have a nice dinner and be relaxed for the show the next day, as opposed to being in there for 14 or 15 hours and being raw and fully feeding on caffeine for the next morning. So instant updating's nice. I have really started to use collaborative entry into ShoFlo lately. All my A1s do all their own mic assignments. All my LDs that I've been working with, and I just started working with LightSwitch, and LightSwitch just really started using ShoFlo for some projects, and they love it. So they're entering all the cues in. As a show caller, one of the things, you know, everybody's got a accurate sheet in front of them. They pretty much what I have to do is warn people about what's going to happen next and make sure what the transitions are going to be are uppermost in their minds. It doesn't. That's where mistakes get caught when I do warns and standbys, and the more information I've got in there, the more LX numbers, mic numbers, everything else, the better chance that somebody's going to go, oh shit, I thought that was going to be handheld. It's not going to be a handheld. So that's what makes this very valuable, I think.
On the other hand, though, one of the things that I find really interesting about the product is the fact that it allows each of the various people to have their own columns and have their own notes, but if you don't need that information, you can make it go away. So not everybody, so if I don't need to know all the individuals, like I like to leave lighting people, they're really good at their jobs, and I just kind of let them do their thing, and 90% of the time, if there's a video rolling, they know to take the lights down, and then when it's done, you bring them back up.
I might give a restore cue or something. But
yeah. So it's, or if something out of the ordinary is happening because it's an award show and they want to do a ballyhoo at a certain time or something. But not having to see all of that stuff sometimes is good too. So that's I think an interesting part of it as well. One of the questions that came in from the audience, this was something I was kind of curious too, is what are some of the other applications of something like this? That it's, you know, because it's not just meetings and events, right, Stephen?
Yeah. Well, absolutely, it's not. So the other, you know, and this just goes to show calling as a whole too.
Exactly.
But I mean, you know, one thing that's been cool, and it's also scratched a beautiful, oh no, that's weird to say, scratched an itch for me personally, was, you know, I was doing, for the most part, you know, 8 or 10 years of corporate, and I knew there's, you know, other fields out there to go run and play in and stuff like that, but I had never, you know, gotten much exposure to those yet. And so ShoFlo, because it, you know, because the rundown and the idea of needing to create a run of show or a production schedule or share files back and forth is a universal production problem. We get exposure to more than just corporate events. We get to see, you know, worship, which is, you know, the larger, you know, any of these churches that are doing some of that multi-site stuff or the mega church stuff. Honestly, technology is just blowing up. You know, the fact that a Pandora and a watch out or even a MacBook Pro can output 4K, you know, things like that, gives anyone who has an audience an opportunity to create awesome and really big and powerful and effective things. But the more you load up, the more you are responsible for it, that it actually hits. I like to say that, you know, a good production team you know, did a good job if the audience never had any distractions at all, and if they actually just heard the message and experienced, you know, the moment. But as soon as a mic goes out, and particularly this is huge in like worship, you know, if that preacher's up there, and as soon as a microphone goes out, or if a video accidentally plays, or the graphic changes in the wrong way, it's like you lost everyone's attention because we accepted and put large format like screens in the room. We now are responsible for making sure that those screens and those cues are correct. Otherwise, you're just distracting everybody. So worship's big. For ShoFlo, sports blew up. It's crazy. I was never even a big sports guy, but a lot of the guys on my team are, and they love it. But sports broadcasting is huge. So when you go into the Orlando Magic, or if you go into the Phillies or the Braves or the Rams or the Cowboys or the Dolphins, these are all teams that use ShoFlo now. For their in-arena or in-venue production, scoreboard production. So the stuff that goes up there, the fan cams, the the Geico Kiss Cam that happens in Section 108. That's all produced by the exact style of team, as in, i.e., there's a show caller, a director, an A1 video, but they're just literally hearing and executing cues for the jumbotron, trying to activate the people in the venue. And then finally, broadcast, which we don't have a significant amount of, but we're moving into pretty aggressively right now. And that's just obviously television and broadcast, things like that. So those are the other areas that use both, some idea of like a show caller or a director, and then build rundowns. At the end of the day, everybody was always building them in Excel. It's funny. Right. Everyone was doing the same thing.
I think it's got some potential in Broadway theater and opera as well, although those stage managers are generally trained in programs that don't apply to the old Excel run a show format. They usually work out of books, but I think that as new people come up in there, this is going to get used more and more often for that, because there's too much information to write into script pages.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing you say there, Keith. Yeah, generally speaking, we've found, and this isn't even ShoFlo at this point because we don't have to do a ShoFlo promo here, but the way that people, like, one of the cool things from our end is that we get to see. I mean, I've seen 1,000 cue sheets or rundowns or run of shows. One thing that's interesting is in the sports industry, they're not competing with each other. They do on the field, obviously, but the production teams don't. So there's so much more like sharing going on in that industry. Their trade shows, people get up in roundtables and literally just put on their screen, here's what my game script looks like. Here's what technology I use. Here's a creative company I use to produce this video for our opener of the game. There's so much more transparent, but then you go into corporate and no one's sharing because there's, because everyone worked really hard to get their clients, and they don't, they think that they have their special sauce. And it is true, a lot of companies do have special sauce. Keith, the KBO's he's been rocking as long as I know him, so I mean, they're doing something right over there, clearly. But my point on that to say is that when it comes to things like rundowns and cue sheets, there's not a lot of special ponies there. They're all kind of the same thing, and any freelancer for the most part will tell you that it's traditionally the table grid view with items on the left side with item numbers, department columns across the left and right, which is audio, video, lights, etc., and then your cues. It's really just a matter of how much does that production company bucket into one row a cue, or do they really break those out and give their production teams a chance to accurately reflect what they're going to do in its own sort of row or cue. And that's the only reason I mentioned that. With Keith was sharing on theater, they do actually have a different view. They are more long script. From what I've gathered, it's not your traditional table grid. It's more of a book, like Keith was talking about.
It's an extremely confusing book.
Yeah. Yeah. But you touched on where I wanted to kind of guide the conversation next, because yes, it's not the ShoFlo show, but exactly. we do obviously want to highlight the product because it is a very unique product, and so we want to make sure that people know that it's out there and that it's a possibility for them. But where I wanted to go more in general to kind of broaden it back out again is kind of technology's impact on production. But before we go there, I want to deal with kind of the elephant in the room when it comes to software, any kind of collaboration software that you might be using, and that's the internet. I mean, and so I kind of wanted to ask, how has obviously the evolution of the internet, internet availability, I should say, how has that really affected production technology, not only just for ShoFlo, but for production technology in general? Keith, why don't we start with you?
Well, certainly one of the big things it's done is allow for massive graphics changes and new graphics and video and media introductions at the last possible minute. Because if you got a big pipe and you got your creative team off-site, which they usually are, then they can be working on something 20 minutes before it goes on screen. Mm-hmm. Doesn't make it a good thing. But,
no. But we've been there.
Yeah, but they can do that, and that as long as you've got a content manager and a big pipe, then that's really not a big deal, because that stuff can get loaded in and it can get played. So that's one of the biggest impacts, certainly, I think. I don't know, just communication in general is easier too with remote team members. certainly, because even when you're on a show, I'll be emailing and texting people at different parts of the earth at different times, depending on what we're waiting for the next day or the next 2 days.
And Stephen, before we throw it to you, I just want to throw in this kind of anecdote. I mean, I looked at ShoFlo very, very early on in when it was development. And for me personally, the shows that I was on, I remember thinking the internet's just not there yet. Like the availability of the internet, having all, like I was looking at it all going, I love all of this. But where we were at with the shows that we were working on, we didn't have that ubiquitous internet, you know, available even at every venue, much less. So if you could talk a little bit about how that's helped, you know, how you, not only has your software evolved along with that, but how do you get around that, you know, as the technology has gotten better? Because we're still not quite there. So how do you get around that not having internet everywhere issue?
It's real. We get asked it almost 100% of the time when we're doing demonstrations and things like that. Anyone who's, you know, actually thinking about how do I roll this out, they start hitting that. You know, 3 or 4 years ago, it was 4 times more difficult to answer that question, and it just kind of that's all it is. That's the answer to it. It's software that's cloud-based, and with that comes the like Keith was sharing. Internet unlocks a lot of things on your show site, not just ShoFlo. It unlocks Dropbox, email, you know. It unlocks. So there at some level, I would put on any production company that you cannot honestly do what you need to do anymore in today's world without some level of infrastructure there to get that, you know, to keep up with what we build our lives around every day of the week, which is, you know, access to the web and to the internet.
And that's in the first client conversation for us. The very, very, very first client conversation is you're going to need a robust internet connection on site. You're going to have to pay for it. Doesn't matter. You're going to use it. We're going to use it. Everybody's going to use it. Exactly. You're going to want to get your email when you're on site. You're going to want to be able to access your Dropbox when you're on site. You don't want to walk into a hotel ballroom with a 1 up, 1 down and try to figure out what's going to happen. So we give clients guidelines, and we usually give them a 10-10 minimum guideline for anything that we do. But we also say if you can get into the hotel pipe, or if you can get into the university, if you're doing a university show, pretty much all those people have really robust internet systems. You just have to get by the switch management and the cost. So you got to say up front to the client, you're going to have to pay for this, and it's not just us.
To break down the tech speak, 10 megabits down, 10 megabits up, right?
Yeah.
And that's good for ShoFlo for most things that we've seen.
Yeah.
The other thing to remember about any collaborative software, or not any collaborative software, but this one in particular, is if it goes down, you've still got the last version. Mm-hmm. So you're no worse than you were if you had the last printed version of Excel. And when it comes back up, you can immediately, it's one of the good things about if anybody goes down, or if the system goes down, when the show caller tracks himself back again, everybody snaps right to where he is on the day and time, and starts tracking the show again.
Yeah, I would say, you know, Brent, that those types of things, like Keith just mentioned, that's what we're trying to do on our part, is to help alleviate it while the world is transitioning. Particularly in live events, I think it's a crime what venues ask you to pay. So I think if anything, we need to start a protest or something like that. I don't know. Some days I want to like lead an army down to the Mandalay Bay or the Gaylord and just really, you know, ram it down their throats what they're actually asking us to pay for something that I can pay $50 a month for and get a higher connection in my own personal home. So that's inappropriate, and I think that will right size itself, or it should. But you know, at the end of the day, we do, as vendors, feel a responsibility to help solve the problems that our customers are running into. And our customers do run into what you're talking about, which is like, bummer, I really want to use ShoFlo, but I don't have
right. Well, and it does, even though it's a hindrance, it also forces ingenuity. I mean, it's what mobile apps went through 3 years ago. I mean, where it was the exact same question of, you know, well, what if I can't get access to the internet? What if I don't have internet? And that's when they started figuring out how to do, you know, really robust caching, where, you know, it would just stay on there, and, you know, and then like you said, the second it hits the internet, boom, it's pings, we're back up to date, and everything's back together again.
Well, you get
the printout.
Exactly. Well, and that's it. I mean, it's one of those things where you're like, okay, well, I helped you reduce 90 out of 92 versions of your
Right.
production schedule. But one more thought on that is just so we're building our native app right now, and so that will solve another version of the offline. And then we actually just purchased a company that had as an offline answer to this, and we're looking at the right way to roll that out
Right.
across ShoFlo. So I think it's ours to own as well too, not
Yeah.
the providers.
And that's that's exactly where I was going to go. This is something that is moving out to where I kind of wanted to take it to the larger issue of technology and production. That's something, anything like you say that's collaborative in any way, shape, or form is going to have similar issues and similar ways to get around it. But we're getting every year we get you think about like 3 years ago compared to now, the percentage of events that just have internet and fairly robust internet.
Clients need it too. It's not just the production. The client needs it.
What are some of the other? Go ahead.
Sorry. More and more, we're using that. We're using on-site internet file transfers too. I mean, we'll get something at the front of house that needs to go into the watchout, and it's we're networked up so that we can do that very easily, and that doesn't have to come from one point. It doesn't have to come from somebody walking up with a disk to an operator. Now it can go from almost any point and get into the system. So another good reason to have internet.
Yeah.
Content management is a whole other barrel of software and stuff that's out there that, again, some of which was before its time. That, being able to think about managing breakout sessions and general sessions and just having a central point of upload, and then it just spools out to where it needs to go. Okay, that needs to go to that room, that needs to go to that room, that needs to go to that room. And that technology's been around for a few years, but it's only kind of coming into its own now with the ubiquitous internet and being able to pitch stuff. What are some of the other kinds of technology that you guys feel is having the biggest impact on production today? Stephen?
Media servers. I think they're pretty much changing the game. Like you had mentioned, Brant, watch out. You did a one presentation's got 50 cues, and I think it's awesome. If I was to stay in corporate as a show tech, I think I would have gravitated towards media servers. I love the idea of Pandoras and watchouts where you're basically, it's a live After Effects where you can move shapes around and play sequences, and it just does it right there live. But with that comes with the cost. You show that to a client, and you say, "Whoa, did you know you could, move it from this screen to that screen or whatever?" And that's fine. But then all of a sudden, you absolutely hands down have to have KBOGroups type level production to be able to execute that. That's not for the breakout room team. That's entirely for large venue GS teams that know what they're doing, because it's a mess if you just try to let someone think of that as a PowerPoint. It's got to be thought of what it actually is, which is a media server that's executing a lot of sub queues, and they have to be called in the right sequence and all that kind of stuff. So I would say media servers, and then on the flip side of that would be display. I mean, it's just changing so fast. I love it. It's so cool. What was before 4x3 when I was in the industry entry, and Keith can go way back prior to that, but what was 4x3 screens are now went to 69, then they went to super wide. Now they're curved, and then it went to LED, and then to see what they're doing with projection mapping now, and the ability to move objects around live, and for that mapping to follow that is incredible. I think the challenge with that is, you can overwhelm an audience, I think, with visual splendor and stuff, and then they're desensitized to anything that doesn't meet that new level of presentation. So, i.e., the GS opening is so amazing, and it's just wowed everybody, and then the CEO comes out the walk and he delivers a presentation, and it just goes right over everybody's head because all they're thinking about is, how come he's not using all these things and all the widgets, or whatever it is.
And that happens a lot. I mean, you do see that where you've got someone and they bring in the giant panoramic screen, but you could clearly tell they didn't pay any attention to what was going to be on it. They just thought it was going to be cool. Yeah. So, Keith, what other kinds of technology have had big impact on production?
I think LEDs LED is the big moment right now. So much of projection is even changing over to LED. I'm about to go into a show with a 270-foot by between 10 and 20 tall, depending on where it is, LED wall, and there won't be a single regular projection surface anywhere. Yeah. And the cost. I mean, LED is still ridiculously costly, but it's going to do the same thing as projection has. It's going to keep coming down and coming down and coming down. Becomes more and more available, but the issue with that is that you're really starting to push an incredible amount of pixels at everything you do, and they have to be pushed at the same time. So we're into media server world, and an interesting thing about being a show caller is you get to learn a new technology every year. Because if you think you can go in and call a show with a media server that you don't at least understand the basics of how it operates and spits out media to various things, you're going to be sadly mistaken at some point. So I get to learn a new piece of software every year. I'm going to work with a D3 for the first time here coming up in a couple of days, and that's a new piece of software for me. That's probably, from what I understand, the most capable server that's out there right now. But we do a lot with Pandora and Watchout, and they can do. I'm a Watchout fan. It can do almost anything I want it to do,
except go backwards.
Except go backwards.
It doesn't go backwards very well. That I learned. But yes, it's a quality server. I just wanted to throw out that as far as display technology, like I honestly. The LED wall started big and have been coming down, and the distance between the dots have been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But it kind of started with like the billboard size things. I'm kind of interested in watching coming up from the other direction, that as like phone and tablet display technology gets better and better and thinner and flexible. Are we going to start getting to the point where we've got these flexible display panels that we can just put on anything, and then we don't need projection mapping anymore because it's going to be, we can just snap on these panels and bend them around and bring them in. Like, I really think that's going to happen.
Well, it actually has already. We don't have like, what I'm expecting to see eventually is sort of a film, an LED film that can be laid over and, almost do a Terminator thing where it can be actually go over any contour. But as far as flexible panels are concerned, one of my vendors just bought, 900 A3 flexible panels, A3 being 3 millimeters between the, 3 millimeters between the pixels. Yeah. And they're all curvable and flexible, and you can do anything you want to with them. So it's for auto show, and so you'll have a chance to see them at an arena near you sometime soon. Probably show.
Yeah, I'm talking more like the phone display, so like an OLED display where it's that really microscopic distance between the pixels where you'll be able to stand 2 feet away from it.
And now you're talking a real issue, because if you look at this iPhone 8 OLED display, that's got the same number of pixels in it that a large LED wall does. So if you want to multiply this several hundred times, you're going to need a media server. I don't know.
The size of Kentucky.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right, well, we're starting to wind down, getting back up towards the top of the hour. So let's kind of start to wrap it up a little bit. Much like at the beginning of the show, we've kind of got the standard questions for the end of the show. So I'm going to ask each one of you. Now, I started with Stephen last time, so Keith, that means you get to field it first this time. If you could pick only one, what would be your one tip for event planners? And it could be production related, or it could be beyond that, but obviously today's more about show calls and production.
Take Stephen first. I'm going to think about this.
Oh.
If there can be only one, sorry, movie reference.
Yep.
I don't know. It's I think for me, it's really understanding your client's expectations and knowing how to scale the ability of what you're going to do to those expectations. Far too many event planners promise everything and can't deliver, or don't ever really understand what they're being asked for. You gotta. My tip is listen to the client as a producer, as a show caller. Listen to them and try to really draw them out, find out what story they want to tell and what they're expecting to see. And if you do that, you're way ahead of the game. It's not a very technical issue at all.
I like it. Yeah, I guess as I had one extra minute to think about that, I'll answer that through the lens view of like as a show caller. I think that if a producer, like a Keith, can find a good show caller for that, like understands the show and handled it well. You gotta, I just hold on to them, and I know Keith does. You gotta hold on to them as long as you possibly can, and the crew that made that up, because a lot of what I did when I was doing shows was the large tentpole shows, big ones. Just the nature of the company that I worked for. They got hired to do big shows, and I got to go along and do these big arena shows. And if you had to deal with a different show caller and a different, backstage crew every single show, it's already such a messy workflow. Production is live event production. It's only really a bunch of people's experience. The fact that I've done 1,000 shows, or Keith's done a couple hundred or 1,000 or whatever it is shows, and the A1, that we all sort of get in the room and don't act like we're just bonkers, but we actually kind of generally expect it to go a direction. And if you didn't have a cue to cue before a show, then someone would be like, wait, where's my cue to cue, or whatever. So like that helps us all generally get in the right universe. But if you can have the same crew and the same show caller do the same show for a series of years, that's when you can really do some cool things. Because I remember my favorite times was when I could do the second or third year on a show, and I'd go pitch the show caller or the producer. I'd be like, we could try like a 2-pip thing for the interview this year. It could be cool. And I'm like selling it, because I'm passionate, because I don't want to just do the same thing over again. But because there's confidence in the fact that the show caller knows Steven, or Keith knows Steven's not going to mess up the rest of it, there's room for improvement and creative and innovation and things like that. And I think that's a huge piece that a lot of people take for granted, that they're like, oh, I'm the producer and I just got to plug in these holes and that's it. And Keith doesn't do that, clearly.
No.
But, that's a big piece, I think.
I'll second that completely. And the other thing is that if I'm in a situation where I can hire the same AV company to do the same show over and over again, and when we work with AV people, we ask them to give us people who are going to be able to be on shows time after time after time. So that removes a whole layer of communication issues for me.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
At the same time, and I'll throw this out just because it's one that I often offer up in my sessions, you still need to get those extra other bids and keep everybody honest. Even if, I've had that AV crew that, I would bring on every show all over the world if I could, but sometimes you still need to get that extra bid and just make sure you keep them honest and keep an eye on the sometimes increasing prices and things like that. So, and people come and go too. They move to different companies and things along those lines as well. All right, so we've got one final question before we start to wrap things up, and that is asking if either of you have any new or cool resources that you want to share. It doesn't have to be production related. Could be a life hack that's working for you right now. Could be a website, a blog, a book, a gadget. I'm always all about the gadgets, so I enjoy those kinds of things. So I tried to start with Keith last time. We'll start with Steven on this one.
A new life or resource. Well, I've got something similar to Event Icons that I've been working on in the last year called Production Channel, production-channel.com. Same concept, get a bunch of cool people who are in the production industry, talk about the industry for a little bit. So just encourage anyone to check that out if you enjoy all things production. Outside of that, I'm more in software now than I'm not. So I actually follow a lot of blogs that are in the software world, and one that I follow a lot is a company called Intercom.io, and they're just doing an amazing job at changing the way that you would handle support for a customer. And support used to be like support tickets, like, oh, ticket number 132, here's your problem, and let's go back and forth. And they're humanizing the whole thing, making it very natural language, but they're also doing it with bots and stuff. And Keith feels that blue chat that Keith and I and my customer service team use every once in a while, that's what that is. That's Intercom. It's the ability to be with Keith on show site to some extent, and for him not to feel like he's all alone. So I've been highly inspired by the way that they're building their company and the product that they've got.
I got two really quick things. One is just work with companies that have 24-hour online technical support for everything you do, and it makes a huge difference when something's gone wrong and you can get a hold of somebody right away. And my life hack is hire somebody young for your company. Hire somebody in the 22 to 28-year age range. Got a guy who's worked for us for 3 or 4 years right now who thinks that the learning curve on a new piece of software should be 45 minutes or less. And he pretty much does that. So it's what keeps me moving towards new things all the time. And I just think that's a lot of our industry has gotten very, very old in the last year or two. You're watching the industry age and not a lot of new people coming up. So go look for them. Yeah.
Yeah, the gray's definitely starting to come in. I do this all the time. Like, I'll have something planned out for what I think my resource of the week should be, and then I'll decide literally in the last 30 seconds of the show to do something different. So that's why when anybody was watching the video there, I was kind of scrambling and getting up from my desk. Since we were talking about show calling and production, I decided to actually go with my headset. After years of being on those tank headsets that weigh about 1,000 pounds. A lighting designer finally said, you can just buy these really lightweight headsets, and they're not terribly expensive. And it was under $100. But I'm blanking on the model number. I think it's a Shure. No, it's actually a Clearcom. So it's an actual Clearcom product, and it's lightweight. It goes over the back of my head, and then just has an earbud that goes right in there. And so
you can play your iPod on there.
No, you can't, unfortunately. No, it's the standard 4-pin XLR, so it works with most of the Clearcom set. So anybody who's going to be spending a decent amount of time on headset, I would highly recommend it. It's a great head. It gets a little fiddly to try and kind of get it sitting just right, especially if you have glasses, because it goes over the back of the head. But once it's on, I literally will forget that it's on, and go to get up from the table and get caught by the cord and that kind of stuff. So anybody who's spending a significant amount of time on comm, I highly recommend it. It's a Clearcom product, and you should just be able to get it on Amazon or anything like that.
Cool.
Oh, with that, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Stephen, ShoFlo is the product. That's SHOFLO, ShoFlo.TV. ShoFlo.tv. There you go. Where can people find out more about what you're up to, what ShoFlo's up to, Twitter account, anything like that?
Just at ShoFlo.tv, and then Facebook as well too. All the normal places. Pretty easy to Google and find. So just look for ShoFlo.
All the usuals. And Keith, how about you? Where can people find out more about what you're up to?
Oh, the usual website, KBOGroup.com, but also we have a pretty heavy LinkedIn presence. We tend to live more on LinkedIn than on Facebook. So that's where we are.
Fantastic. And I'm Brant Kruger, at Brant Kruger on basically all of the social networks, Facebook.com/Brant Kruger. And we'll see you all next time on the next episode of Event Icons. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of #Event Icons. To catch the transcription and all of the resources mentioned, head to www.helloendless.com/blog. This week's episode will be posted and available by next Tuesday. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway and join the Twitter conversation sponsored by Alex Plaxon and Little Bird Told Media. Just tag your post with #Event Icons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on #Event Icons.
And I don't know if you can see that, Keith, but that's the Highlander on the wall behind me.
Right next to